money couldn't buy Kelly a happily ever after.
He just said, I'm at my wit's end with this.
The divorce was ugly.
Kelly, put the baby down. The police is coming.
But it was never finalized.
He was found in the closet.
And the investigation into Jim Cannon's death would unmask the chaotic truth behind Kelly's marriage.
It was clear that something serious was going on.
June 23, 2008. It was around 8 a.m. when nanny Carly Dewey arrived at the upscale West Nashville home of Jim and Kelly Cannon.
The housekeeper was already there, and we just kind of did our normal thing and started talking, waiting for everybody to wake up.
The housekeeper ordinarily would do work in the downstairs portion of the house until the family, Mr. Cannon and the children, came downstairs.
But Mrs. Cannon would not be coming downstairs that morning. She and Jim were separated pending final settlement of their divorce. In the meantime, Kelly was living in a condo not far from the family home.
What had once been an idyllic marriage was just simply in shreds.
But as Carly and the housekeeper eventually realized that Monday morning, Jim and the kids didn't seem to be in the house either.
The housekeeper became concerned after she was there for a significant period of time and never heard anything from the family.
She went upstairs, and then she came back down and she said, "No one's here."
Jim's car was in the driveway, however. So with growing concern, Carly and the housekeeper went upstairs for a closer look. All the beds were empty. And in the bedroom shared by Jim's young sons, something else was out of place.
The bedroom closet door was closed, and the dresser from the boys' room was pushed against that closet.
We moved the dresser. It actually ended up not being too heavy, so it was easiest for her to do. And she had a look that freaked me out so bad. I started just like, what is it? And she was just like, "It's Jim."
He was dead.
He had significant ligature injuries. Obviously, some sort of thin cord or belt had been wrapped around his neck.
It was just so crazy that we had just talked to him on Friday, and he was gone.
But where were the children? And where, for that matter, was Kelly?
I just thought it was going to turn into a huge, massive killing spree, not just Jim.
Kelly Cannon had lived a life of privilege long before she married Jim.
Mrs. Cannon was the daughter of a physician. She went to a very prestigious all-girls high school here in Nashville.
After college, she worked a short stint at the office of the Davidson County Medical Examiner.
She was a lab tech. She actually assisted in autopsies.
Next, she spent several years pursuing a PR career.
She had worked in a former governor's office. She had worked for NASA.
By the mid-90s, however, Kelly had gone back to school, pursuing a pre-med degree.
Her father is a doctor. One of Kelly's brothers is a doctor. And I think that Kelly wanted to follow in the footsteps of her father.
In between studies, the pretty 20-something was a regular in West Nashville's social circuit.
We had a big group of friends we ran around with, young Nashvillians, so to speak, and she was just in that mix.
So was a young attorney named Jim Cannon.
He liked to socialize, had a lot of guy friends and a lot of girlfriends, not romantically involved girlfriends, but just a lot of girlfriends that he kind of ran around with.
We'd all go out after work, a couple of times a week and go to parties and social activities on the weekends. We did a lot of charity fundraisers together.
Jim and Kelly quickly became an item.
She was a pretty girl, unbelievably nice, obviously smart, fun-loving, and I could see why Jim was attracted to her.
I thought this was the greatest thing that happened to him. I thought, fantastic, they're going to have a family.
The couple married in 1996. Kelly dropped out of college and alongside Jim, soon carved out a life worthy of a West Nashville society couple.
By all appearances, the Cannons had it made.
In 1999, Jim used his considerable legal savvy to launch a successful new business.
It's medical reimbursement. They collect insurance money on large hospital claims.
It was a multi-million-dollar company. It was a very profitable company.
That same year, Kelly gave birth to a son. A second son followed a year later.
They loved their kids, you know. I mean, they were typical parents, would do anything for their kids.
In 2005, the Cannons bought a beautiful home on Bowling Avenue between West End and Green Hills.
When you hear West End or Green Hills, all of that area, you immediately think money, lots of money.
That was certainly true in the Cannons case.
His wife didn't have to work. His kids were able to go to any school that they wanted. Money wasn't a consideration.
Although, like any family, the Cannons did have their issues, albeit well-hidden ones.
You would never know anything was going on unless you spent any kind of reasonable amount of time with them.
The trouble had started after Kelly gave birth to the couple's two sons.
Both times she had postpartum depression, which was real bad.
When Kelly gave birth to a daughter in 2006, her mental and physical health deteriorated.
Kelly was just not well. She was very sick, so she was pretty much laid up for the most part. She'd get up and kind of go through things, but then she was pretty much right back in bed.
Luckily, Jim could afford the best treatment Nashville had to offer.
She got top-notch care. He made sure that she had every medical opportunity available to her.
She had been prescribed a medication. He wanted her to get better. He wanted her to get help.
Jim made sure Kelly had plenty of help at home, too.
They had nannies, housekeepers, the works. They had it all.
She also had another girl that kind of helped her out with the child care and some other housekeeping stuff, running errands, grocery shopping, things like that. So I guess you could say she had like a personal assistant.
But an unexpected side effect of Kelly's illness began to put a strain on the Cannons' marriage.
She said she injured her back. She was constantly saying she had these types of injuries or getting dental work she didn't need or plastic surgery or whatever, and the main goal was for those pain pills.
She had been prescribed a medication, a lot of prescription medication, mixing it with alcohol, which really caused her behavior to be bizarre at times.
By 2007, Jim had had enough.
They were fighting, just things getting out of control, arguing over what was going on, and he's like, "You've got to get help."
Kelly agreed to go into an inpatient rehab program, and with Kelly away, Jim had to pitch in even more at home.
He was the one that was getting kids up and dressed. They'd come down, I'd get breakfast going with them.
He was trying really hard to be there for his kids, still keeping his responsibilities at work.
When Kelly got out of rehab, the Cannons' life seemed to go back to normal, but not for long.
You know, she'd do well for a while, but the second she gets out, she could not handle it at home on her own.
And after 11 years of marriage, the Cannons' relationship seemed close to the breaking point.
I did notice that he had been sleeping in the office, and I just wrote that off as she was not well and needed a rest, and so he just didn't want to bother her.
Jim's friends knew better, however.
He indicated that things were rocky at home. He didn't elaborate, but it's clear that something serious was going on in his world, but he didn't talk about exactly what that was.
Jim was just at his wit's end, and he told me, he said, "Maggie," he said, "if it wasn't for those kids, I'd probably be divorced now."
Jim soon reached his limit, however.
He just couldn't do it anymore. And I think it escalated to the point in February of 08 where he just decided he needed to file for divorce against her.
And the divorce wasn't by any means amicable. When he filed at the end of February, Jim sought full custody of the kids.
I don't know if that comes from him being an attorney and knowing what he would need in order to get, I guess, the most beneficial outcome of the divorce.
Whatever his motivation, Jim's petition was successful.
Mr. Cannon was awarded temporary custody of all three children. He was also awarded possession of the house. Ms. Cannon was basically put out of the house
Kelly checked into a hotel while her children struggled to adjust to the new living arrangement.
In the chaos of their family situation, the boys had started sleeping in their parents' room, and Mr. Cannon would go down the hall and sleep in the boys' room instead.
They missed her, and so that was their way of connecting with her, and he probably just needed a sound sleep, so he would choose a bed that was away from the boys.
But as Kelly would prove, she was not about to let a court order come between her and her kids. On May 21st, 2008, Metro Nashville 911 received a frantic call from Jim Cannon. In it, he claimed Kelly had just come into the house and was attempting to leave with the kids.
She's got my baby in her arms, and she is feeding on the car right now.
He called the police department, and he alleged that she assaulted him.
Kelly, don't put the baby down. The police is coming. You're going to get in bad trouble if you take that baby off.
She tried to snatch one of the other children and couldn't get him. I think Jim got hold of him, and it was just a bad scene at the house.
No. Are you there, 911?
Yes, sir. I'm still here.
No, they're not getting in the car. No. They're not getting in either car. No, quit.
Hello, sir.
She takes the young little girl, who at that time I think was only like maybe, 12, 18 months old, and got in the car and took off.
When the police arrived moments later, Jim and his sons were standing in the yard, watching as Kelly drove away with her daughter.
Just as she's pulling out of her driveway, the police pull in right behind her.
The police didn't pursue for long, however.
Once the officer realizes there's a child in the car, they terminated the pursuit.
But that didn't mean Kelly got away. Police tracked down her SUV's onboard navigation device.
She was taken into custody later that day at a motel and was charged with evading arrest and domestic assault and reckless endangerment due to the fact she had a child in that car when she was trying to get away from the police.
Kelly made bail, but just as Jim had threatened on the 911 tape, she was in bad trouble. And worse was coming.
The court was ordering her to stay completely away from Jim and her children for their safety.
Coming up, police receive another 911 call.
He was found laying on the floor in the closet.
And this time, there was no sign of Kelly.
We just kept saying, we're like, you have to find Kelly. You need to find out where she is.
June 23rd, 2008. It had been little more than a month since Kelly Cannon had been arrested during a dispute at her estranged husband Jim's home.
She had basically assaulted her husband, pushed him down, and then stolen basically her little 18-month-old girl.
Kelly was out on bail, and the charges resulting from the incident were still pending. That morning, squad cars were back outside the home Kelly once shared with her husband, her late husband. Earlier that morning, the Cannons' nanny and housekeeper had called 911 and reported finding him dead.
He was found laying on the floor in the closet in the boys' bedroom. He did sleep in there, and let them sleep in the big bed.
And after a preliminary examination of Jim's body, detectives quickly determined they had a homicide on their hands.
He had abrasions, various abrasions on his face, and also quite a number of bruises on his face.
There was also lateral marks that were parallel to each other around his neck, which would be consistent with someone using a ligature.
But before they could dig further into the matter of Jim's death, police had a more pressing mystery to solve. Jim and Kelly's 7- and 8-year-old sons and 18-month-old daughter were also missing.
Police at that point were primarily, first and foremost, concerned with the well-being of the children, because the children weren't where they were supposed to be, which was at home.
But the nanny and the housekeeper thought they had a pretty good idea where the children might be.
We just kept saying, we're like, you have to find Kelly. You need to find out where she is, because the kids are not here and she has the kids.
We had some patrol units go over to a condominium where she was staying at, and we found the children there.
The children were safe, but the fact that they were with Kelly raised an immediate question. How did they get there? From the crime scene, lead detective Brad Putnam sent another detective to the condo to question Kelly.
I had that detective take a brief statement from her as to when was the last time she talked to her husband.
In a taped statement, Kelly admitted taking the children, but denied any knowledge of Jim's death.
When was the last time you saw your husband?
On May 22nd.
And where was that at?
That's when all this started.
According to Kelly, she hadn't seen Jim since the evening he had called the cops on her, alleging she had assaulted him while taking the baby. Although in her statement, Kelly gave a very different account of the incident.
And he threatened me and he showed me with the baby and he said, this isn't working and I'm going to do everything I can to keep you from the children, etc., etc.
Kelly claimed that's why she had taken the baby and fled.
I was scared to death because, he's the attorney.
Kelly told police she hadn't seen Jim since, but she said she had spoken to him at around 10:30 the night before while she was out having dinner with a girlfriend.
She had gone out with a friend to Bricktops, and that's a restaurant over on West End, not far from where she lived, not far from where she used to live with her husband.
Kelly told the detective that Jim had called her cell phone while she was at the restaurant. What had followed was a disturbing conversation.
According to Kelly, Jim told her that he was frightful, that he had been threatened. And she proceeded to ask him, well, who's threatening you? And he wouldn't say.
Kelly said she had no idea who might have been threatening Jim. She told police she had gone home to her apartment shortly after the phone call. But she also said she had spent the next hour worrying about what Jim had just told her.
At some point, she decided, I need to go check on my children. And she proceeded to the home, which wasn't very far.
According to Kelly, she had arrived to find the house wide open and no sign of Jim.
She sees the front door open, she goes in, she doesn't see her husband.
She called out to Jim Cannon and didn't hear anything, and just gathered up the children and left for their safety and for hers, according to her.
Then, Kelly asked the detective some questions of her own.
What's going on? Where is he?
He's at home. I need to know what you saw when you were at the house.
I'm telling you what
Okay.
I saw.
Eventually, the detective told Kelly why he was there. Jim was dead.
That's why we're here, because you have the children. You just think you might be the last person maybe to talk to them, see them. Okay? I'm sorry.
He was so dead.
Yes, ma'am.
After hearing the news, Kelly insisted she told him everything she knew. But was Kelly's story of a mysterious phone call the truth? Contacted by police, the woman she had met for dinner confirmed at least some of Kelly's story.
There was a phone call, and her friend verified that, the friend that she was eating dinner with that night.
Back at the crime scene, Detective Putnam pieced together the details of Jim's death.
We feel he was caught by surprise, that he was asleep and was probably, in all likelihood, strangled, there in the bed and dragged out of the bed.
Detectives were never able to actually locate a murder weapon, but they were able to locate there in the room a piece of a cell phone charger.
It was an AC adapter, the part that plugged into the wall.
The cord was missing, that had been broken off, and it was nowhere around to be found.
Could the missing cord be the murder weapon? Even if Jim's attacker had taken the cord, there were still plenty of clues left behind.
There was blood found in the hall outside of where Jim was killed.
A few feet away, police found another potentially significant piece of evidence.
Walking into the boy's bedroom, we noticed the fingertip of a latex glove laying on the floor.
The body of the glove was not found. We can only surmise, maybe it just broke off.
Could the fingertip fragment point police toward Jim's killer?
Hopefully there had been DNA in the glove.
The blood sample and the glove were immediately entered into evidence.
That takes several weeks to perform DNA analysis.
In the meantime, Detective Putnam drove over to the apartment to question Kelly, who was clearly a person of interest at that point.
There was a dead man in the closet, a man who had recently taken an order of protection out against her.
Questioned by Putnam, Kelly essentially repeated what she had already told police. She had received a mysterious phone call from Jim.
He said that he felt like somebody was threatening him.
And finding the house empty, she had taken the kids for their own safety.
I just put him in my car and left.
I said, why didn't you call the police? And she said, well, he had threatened me with an order of protection.
You know, and telling me he was going to send me to jail and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, I was scared, but I was more scared for my children, to tell you the truth.
He is the one that's trying to divorce her and take her kids. So I suppose she didn't care where he was or what he was doing. She cared about 3 children she gave birth to.
Although, as Kelly explained to the detective, she was the one who had first contemplated divorce.
I caught him cheating, and that's when all of this started.
Who did he cheat with?
A woman that he went to boarding school with.
But when Jim found out she'd been to see a lawyer, Kelly said he'd quickly started his own divorce proceeding.
He jumped on me.
Beat you to the punch.
And then he took the kids. He picked the kids up from school, so he would have physical custody of the children.
Clearly, Kelly thought Jim had done her wrong. But didn't that also give her a motive for murder?
Mothers are going to do whatever they need to be with their kids.
And just how far would Kelly go? The police were starting to wonder. During the interrogation, Putnam did a little snooping around in Kelly's apartment.
We had her sign a waiver for us to, search the apartment.
In the living room, Putnam discovered a small paper bag.
I looked in the paper bag and there was a box of latex gloves.
Of course, the detective had already been to the scene and knew that gloves were left at the scene. So he was very suspicious of that.
The police seized the box of gloves and sent them to the crime lab to be tested alongside the glove tip. And while they awaited the test results, Detective Putnam tried to discover who, besides his estranged wife, might have a motive to kill Jim Cannon.
I talked to his business partner and couldn't find that he really had any problems with anybody. We go to where the evidence takes us. There was nobody else. No one could be developed as a suspect.
Coming up, the divorce file sheds new light on the Cannon marriage.
He alleged that she was hearing voices.
And the DNA testing raises troubling questions.
Contributor was a female, unknown female.
Tuesday, June 24th, 2008. It had been 4 months since Jim Cannon had filed for divorce from his wife, Kelly. And less than 24 hours earlier, on the morning of June 23rd, Jim had been found dead in his West Nashville home. But police already had a solid suspect.
All the evidence pointed to Kelly Cannon. She was not a suspect at the beginning. She was a person of interest. We go to where the evidence takes us and everything pointed to her.
Kelly had admitted she'd been to the house the night of the murder.
That's the million-dollar question, because did she go there with the intent of committing a crime, or was she just a concerned mother out at 1:30 in the morning, just stopping by the house to check on the kids?
Questioning Kelly after Jim's body had been found, police discovered a box of latex gloves in her apartment.
We knew that the killer wore gloves, so of course that was sort of a little red flag.
But the gloves weren't all the police based their suspicions on. By that Tuesday, Detective Putnam was also privy to the full details of the Cannons' divorce.
He somehow found out I'd represented Mr. Cannon in the divorce, and he wanted to know if I had copies of the custody orders of who had custody of the house and who had custody of the children. I said, yes, I do have copies of those orders.
The papers that attorney John Hollins gave the detectives didn't just detail custody matters. The divorce filings painted a picture of a woman struggling with far more than postpartum depression and an addiction to pain pills.
After the birth of her first child, Kelly was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
According to the divorce filing, Kelly had kept her illness under control with medication. But after the birth of her third child, things had changed for the worse.
Those hormone changes after 3 kids, doing it 3 times, not good.
According to the divorce filings, Kelly, wouldn't take her antipsychotic medications.
Miss Cannon claims she was hearing voices over the telephone and other voices, and that was basically as I call the last straw, the last event that happened that I think caused Jim to come see us to file for divorce.
Despite Kelly's mental illness, Jim's attorney said he had only reluctantly filed for divorce, primarily for the children's sake.
He had to hire nannies just to make sure his children were protected because he couldn't be there all the time.
According to his attorney, Jim had also hoped the divorce would spur Kelly to get back on her medication and to seek help for her addiction to painkillers.
Jim was, number one, madly in love with Kelly through the whole thing.
He wanted her to get better. He wanted, her to be his wife and a mother for the children. Jim wasn't pressing for the divorce.
But after the divorce filing, Kelly only seemed to get worse instead of better. Only a few days after the papers were filed, she had been rushed to the emergency room after collapsing in the lobby of a West Nashville hotel.
Her weight got, to 90 pounds at one point, just, I believe, what I was told, due to the alcohol and drug abuse, that she just wasn't eating.
Days later, she had checked into Cumberland Heights, a Nashville rehab center.
She stayed there for 30 days, and they had recommended that she go for longer treatment, a longer period of treatment out of state or at some other long-term treatment facility.
According to Jim's attorney, after she had finished rehab at Cumberland Heights in April, Kelly had not followed the recommendation for outpatient treatment.
At first she agreed to do that, and then she declined to do it.
I don't think that Kelly ever got a solid footing in her sobriety.
But then, barely a month after Kelly was released from rehab, came the incident in May. Kelly had showed up at the house and tried to take the children while Jim dialed 911.
She got the baby. Now she's leaving. She's trying to leave.
Has she been drinking, sir?
I have no idea, but she takes drugs. She's a narcotic addict.
She snatched the youngest child, who was, I think, 18 months at the time, put her in her car, and she took off.
She drove through the yard, ran over all the kids' toys and bikes, had the baby with her in the car, went 70 miles an hour through subdivisions and a very congested mall traffic area.
And as he stood in the yard watching his wife speed away, Jim Cannon made a decision.
It was kind of spiraling out of control, and he felt like he really didn't have any option but to go ahead and proceed with the divorce.
He really wanted to move on for his children's sake and create a life for them that was normal and wasn't filled with craziness.
Jim Cannon never got the chance to create a new life for his children. On the evening of June 22, 2008, someone had snuck into the bedroom where he slept and strangled him.
Once you apply that ligature around the neck to cut off the airway, it just takes a matter of seconds.
And as far as whose hands had tightened the cord, Kelly certainly had a motive. But was she physically capable of committing the crime?
The killer would have to strangle a man to death, get him in the closet, get the chest of drawers in front of the closet, and get out with no one hearing anything. No struggle, nothing. So that would have been challenging for whomever, especially a 5'2", 90-pound woman.
The police hoped that DNA analysis of the glove fragment found at the scene would settle the question. But they weren't just going to sit back and wait on the results. On Wednesday, the detectives started canvassing West Nashville Walgreens stores, hoping to learn just when Kelly acquired the gloves found in her apartment.
The very day they found the body, they went to Kelly Cannon's apartment and were talking to her, and they happened to notice a box of Walgreens brand latex gloves in the apartment.
Reviewing surveillance video taken at a West Nashville Walgreens on the night of Jim's murder revealed how Kelly got the gloves.
Kelly Cannon had actually gone into the Walgreens and picked up a box of latex gloves and exited the business without paying for them.
The video shows her putting them under her arm. You know, she pretends to be interested in other things, actually talks to the pharmacist, and then leaves the store without paying for them.
The same evening they reviewed the Walgreens surveillance video, Metro Nashville police pulled Kelly Cannon over.
When we found her, she was out doing a shopping spree. She had filled her car and made statements that Jim wanted her to have these things, which I thought was kind of strange.
The police had a couple of things for Kelly, too. A pair of warrants. The first forced her to submit to oral swabs for DNA analysis.
She wasn't a happy camper. You know, why couldn't I just call her attorney and make arrangements where they could have just came down like the next day, you know, things of that nature.
Detective Putnam informed Kelly that she would be more than welcome to contact her attorney herself from jail. The second warrant was an arrest warrant, although it wasn't for murder charges.
While the case was under investigation, Detective Putnam actually arrested her for violating the order of protection.
Kelly posted bond the next day, but it wasn't long before she added another picture to her growing portfolio of mugshots. On the morning of July 9th, Detective Putnam took Kelly Cannon into custody for the murder of her husband. Although, much like her previous arrest, she acted as if the whole thing was an annoying inconvenience.
She was in bed, talking on the phone. We kept waiting until her, we need to go.
Why had the authorities finally decided to act? The DNA results had come in the day before.
The tip of a latex glove that was found in the bedroom had Jim's blood on the outside, his DNA. It had Kelly Cannon's DNA on the inside.
But were the results as ironclad as the police and prosecutors had hoped? The crime lab had also tested the blood stain found outside the bedroom where Jim was murdered.
It came back that the contributor was a female, a known female.
It was not Kelly's blood, it was not Jim's blood, nor anybody else that they tested.
Coming up, will the DNA evidence cinch a conviction?
The evidence found on the glove tip was especially strong.
Or will it raise reasonable doubts?
Blood stain 678. You have that in front of you?
Yes.
When Kelly Cannon walked into a Davidson County courtroom on April 26, 2010, she still looked every bit the glamorous West Nashville socialite. But in truth, the mother of three was in desperate straits. She was about to stand trial for a crime that had stunned the city, the murder of her estranged husband, Jim.
It happened in an affluent area of Nashville. A very nice house, a lawyer, his wife who had everything going for them. So that was extremely unusual.
The setting may have been unusual, but the alleged motive wasn't. The prosecution opened their case by outlining the Cannons' contentious divorce and custody battle.
Jim Cannon had made the decision to divorce Kelly and seek full custody of the children, and she decided to take steps, at least in her mind, to stop Mr. Cannon from getting full custody of the children.
In its open, the defense countered by claiming that Kelly was incapable of committing the crime.
The defense strenuously argued that there is simply no way that this petite woman could have killed her husband.
Kelly Cannon was a very small woman, not in the greatest of health at that time. And the defense's argument was that she couldn't have physically been able to strangle James Cannon.
Undeterred, when the prosecutors started presenting their case, they called Jim's attorney to the stand and picked right up where they had left off.
I went through and gave the jury the chronology of the events of the divorce, from the date that it was filed, what were the allegations in it, and the various court orders.
Mr. Cannon was alleging that she was practically crazy. She was crazy. She was nuts. She was on drugs. And I don't know how much of that was for the benefit of the divorce court judge, but those were his allegations.
Whatever the truth of Jim's allegations, the prosecutors claimed that Kelly was clearly angry about the divorce.
She was very upset about the fact that he already had custody of the children.
To prove just how upset, prosecutors called a pair of witnesses. The first was the woman who'd been out with Kelly on the night of Jim's murder. In her testimony, she confirmed that Kelly had spoken to Jim on the phone that night. Although contrary to Kelly's story about a fearful, threatened Jim, her friend had heard a very different conversation.
It sounded like a marital fight where she was, or they were talking about that he was getting custody of the kids, and she indicated that she felt that they were her kids and that he couldn't have them.
How far would Kelly go to keep Jim from getting custody? For an answer, the prosecutors turned to a bartender at a suburban Nashville restaurant. He had seen Kelly's arrest on the news.
We obtained his records that particular day and did find a transaction she had made that day that he was her server and had waited on her there in the bar.
And when he took the stand on the afternoon of April 26th, the bartender recounted the conversation for the jury.
Did she make this statement about killing her husband more than once throughout the course of the time you were listening to her?
Yes, ma'am. She said it in a couple different contexts, that she was so mad that she could kill him, then if he took the babies, tried to take the babies from her, that she would kill him.
Had Kelly made good on her threat? On April 27th, a DNA analyst from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took the stand. Her testimony focused on the primary piece of evidence in the prosecution's case, a tiny piece of latex, part of a glove Jim's killer had apparently left behind.
I did recover DNA, and it was a match to Kelly Cannon.
There's no question the strongest evidence was the DNA evidence. The evidence found on the glove tip was especially strong.
But did the DNA findings also offer hope for the defense? On cross-examination, the defense pointed out that Kelly wasn't the only woman who had left her DNA at the crime scene.
Bloodstain 678. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
And that was determined by you to be an unknown female?
Yes.
The nannies, the housekeeper, we were able to eliminate them.
There was blood in that home that did not belong to Kelly, did not belong to her kids, and that did not belong to Mr. Cannon. That's reasonable doubt.
To raise further doubt, the defense focused on whether Kelly was even physically capable of committing the crime. When they started presenting their case on April 28th, they called a forensic expert to walk jurors through just what it would take to strangle Jim.
This is an act that requires interpersonal contact directly. It requires the assailant to place the ligature around that person's neck and to pull it tight enough and hold it tightly long enough for that person to suffer the damage that leads to death.
We're not talking about a shotgun or gunshot or a stabbing or anything like that. They were alleging that this tiny lady who weighed, I guess, approximately 95 pounds soaking wet, had strangled, taken a bone cord and strangled her husband.
And Kelly's presence in the courtroom only underscored the defense's point.
She definitely does come across as very small, very tiny. She also came across as very emotional. She was in tears for a large part of the trial.
But was she too emotional to testify in her own defense?
You always hope that the defendant does testify. Not only does it make it a more interesting case, but you're curious, her explanation of what happened.
We were all looking forward to hearing what she had to say, but she pled the fifth.
So have you discussed with Mr. Strauss the advantages and the disadvantages of testifying? Okay. And then after your discussion with him, did you make a decision about whether or not you wanted to testify? Okay. And that decision was that you do not want to testify, is that correct? Correct.
But when the defense presented its closing arguments that afternoon, they did offer one last twist. According to the defense, if everything Jim had alleged in the divorce was true, that made Kelly even less capable of committing his murder.
At that relevant time, she's anorexic, she's asthmatic, she's subsisting on wine, enough prescription medications to choke a racehorse, and her ever-present inhaler. But the state's theory is that she morphs into a perfect killing machine.
In its close, the prosecution countered that rather than a killing machine, Jim's murder was merely the work of a desperate woman.
It doesn't require a 300-pound person. It just requires a person with determination. The determination that Jim Cannon wasn't going to take my babies. He was not going to take my children.
April 29, 2010. It was barely an hour and a half after closing arguments in the trial of Kelly Cannon, who stood accused of murdering her estranged husband, Jim. But the mother of 3 was already back in the courtroom. The jury had just announced that it had reached a verdict.
We didn't really have time to get much more than get back to the office and put our things down and make a cup of coffee. And then we were called back to the court.
I was absolutely shocked that the jury came back that quickly.
And when the jury filed in moments later, the prospects looked grim for Kelly.
I just couldn't believe that within an hour, hour and a half, that they would have acquitted her.
I also understand that you do have a verdict in this case.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you, first of all, what your verdict is with regard to the charge of murder in the first degree.
Guilty.
The verdict was guilty on the indicted offense of first-degree premeditated murder. And in Tennessee, the statutory sentence for first-degree premeditated murder is life in prison.
And that was, all I could ask for is that justice was served.
I believe that she did it. I truly believe that she took his life.
Compared to her often emotional behavior at trial, Kelly remained silent through the verdict.
She spent much of the trial in tears, but then the verdict comes in, and there really wasn't much reaction at all. I don't know if that's because she expected it, or if maybe she had, been through so much that she couldn't cry anymore.
But whatever Kelly had been through, it was nothing compared to what her family had suffered.
Kelly Cannon had taken her husband and her children on a roller coaster ride of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and rather than let Mr. Cannon move on with his life, take him and his children off of that roller coaster, she decided to kill him.
A couple of times a week and go to parties and social activities on the weekends. We did a lot of charity fundraisers together.
Jim and Kelly quickly became an item.
She was a pretty girl, unbelievably nice, obviously smart, fun-loving, and I could see why Jim was attracted to her.
I thought this was the greatest thing that happened to him. I thought, fantastic, they're going to have a family.
The couple married in 1996. Kelly dropped out of college and alongside Jim, soon carved out a life worthy of a West Nashville society couple.
By all appearances, the Cannons had it made.
In 1999, Jim used his considerable legal savvy to launch a successful new business.
It's medical reimbursement. They collect insurance money on large hospital claims.
It was a multi-million-dollar company. It was a very profitable company.
That same year, Kelly gave birth to a son. A second son followed.
Annie's housekeepers, the works.
Money wasn't a consideration.
But the money couldn't buy Kelly a happily ever after.
We just said, I'm at my wit's end with this.
The divorce was ugly.
Kelly, put the baby down, the police is coming.
But it was never finalized.
He was found in the closet.
And the investigation into Jim Cannon's death would unmask the chaotic truth behind Kelly's marriage.
It was clear that something serious was going on.
June 23, 2008. It was around 8 a.m. when nanny Carly Dewey arrived at the upscale West Nashville home of Jim and Kelly Cannon.
The housekeeper was already there, and we just kind of did our normal thing and started talking, waiting for everybody to wake up.
The housekeeper ordinarily would do work in the downstairs portion of the house until the family, Mr. Cannon and the children, came downstairs.
But Mrs. Cannon would not be coming downstairs that morning. She and Jim were separated pending final settlement of their divorce. In the meantime, Kelly was living in a condo not far from the family home.
What had once been an idyllic marriage was just simply in shreds.
But as Carly and the housekeeper eventually realized that Monday morning, Jim and the kids didn't seem to be in the house either.
The housekeeper became concerned after she was there for a significant period of time and never heard anything from the family.
She went upstairs and then she came back down and she said, "No one's here."
Jim's car was in the driveway, however. So with growing concern, Carly and the housekeeper went upstairs for a closer look. All the beds were empty. And in the bedroom shared by Jim's young sons, something else was out of place.
The bedroom closet door was closed, and the dresser from the boys' room was pushed against that closet.
We moved the dresser. It actually ended up not being too heavy, so it was easiest for her to do. And she had a look that freaked me out so bad. I started just like, what is it? And she was just like, "It's Jim."
He was dead.
He had significant ligature injuries. Obviously, some sort of thin cord or belt had been wrapped around his neck.
It was just so crazy that we had just talked to him on Friday and he was gone.
But where were the children? And where, for that matter, was Kelly?
I just thought it was going to turn into a huge, massive killing spree, not just Jim.
Kelly Cannon had lived a life of privilege long before she married Jim.
Mrs. Cannon was the daughter of a physician. She went to a very prestigious all-girls high school here in Nashville.
After college, she worked a short stint at the office of the Davidson County Medical Examiner.
She was a lab tech. She actually assisted in autopsies.
Next, she spent several years pursuing a PR career.
She had worked in a former governor's office. She had worked for NASA.
By the mid-90s, however, Kelly had gone back to school, pursuing a pre-med degree.
Her father is a doctor. One of Kelly's brothers is a doctor. And I think that Kelly wanted to follow in the footsteps of her father.
In between studies, the pretty 20-something was a regular in West Nashville's social circuit.
We had a big group of friends we ran around with, young Nashvillians, so to speak, and she was just in that mix.
So was a young attorney named Jim Cannon.
He liked to socialize, had a lot of guy friends and a lot of girlfriends, not romantically involved girlfriends, but just a lot of girlfriends that he kind of ran around with.
We'd all go out after work.